Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a PDA-CA meeting where we are going to get to know Betty Yee a little better. And the history of this is that it was suggested that we endorse her. But it's 2 years before the election. So we thought what might work better, what would work better, is if we had this meeting where we asked questions of her and determined, and heard just how progressive she was. And she is a favorite of ours. In fact, what we have a tradition that started with PDA and moved into PDA-CA of having a luncheon um, at the PDEM conventions. And last year, we started a new tradition, which was to give Progressive Hero Awards. And Betty Yee was one of the first that we gave it to. In fact, she gave hers in the first time we ever gave any. We gave three, and she was one of the three. And it occurred to me that, we need to give her our support and an advantage. However, we will also invite over time the other candidates for governor, as we get to know who they are, and perhaps have meetings similar to this, and eventually have an endorsement meeting. So that's the reason for this meeting. So that what we're going to do is we are going to basically, well, what we will do is the first thing we will do is we will have Betty Yee talk for a little bit and introduce herself and talk about, how she feels about different topics and everything. And when she's done with that, we'll call that an opening statement. We'll have a Q&A session. What the Q&A session will be is we have a bunch of questions that we came up with, the officers came up with. In fact, we have quite a few of them, and we will ask those of her, but we will also allow you to ask questions by putting them into the chat. And then we'll go through the chat and read them to her. So it'll be a combination of stuff we've pre-written that I think you'll approve of because they're all progressive oriented, and your questions that are in the chat. But we do ask that you keep your questions short because we have a record number of people who have signed up to reserve a spot here. And we want as many people as possible to have the opportunity to ask a question. So the question that just popped up is an example of one that's a bit too long. So we'll probably, and it's also premature to ask a question because we have other things to do first. So keep them short, keep your question to a minute or less if you can. And anything else I'm forgetting, David? I guess not, since he's not saying anything. Okay.
Thank you. No, just as a side note, I will be the one that'll be asking the questions
From the chat.
from our queue and from your queue in the chat. So again, try to be brief and hopefully I won't mangle your words at all. Thank you.
Okay. And incidentally, we do have a special guest with us. PDA-CA is basically Progressive Democrats of America, California. We are a state PAC, so our reason to be is to cover state issues, candidates, and things like that. But we have with us a special guest, Ellen Minsky, who is the executive director of PDA, which is a federal PAC. And there's also P4DA that he's, I assume, executive director of. I'm not sure about that. And, you know, Alan, would you like to say hi? Once you're unmuted.
There we go. Yes. Hello, everybody. And what Mike described is true. If a state does not have a unique Progressive Democrats of America PAC, then the Tim Carpenter, the founding executive director of PDA and the founding generation, it is true, structured a very powerful, as it were, executive directorship. And all the operations are sort of, under my leadership. But I want things to be grassroots and all coming up from the grassroots. PJ has to be that way to prosper, in my opinion. But the state PACs is not the case. Mike is the person who's the head of the state PAC, and the team that he works with are. I think that there would be legal ways if all of a sudden PDA, say Utah, a state PAC registered in Utah, went MAGA. I think we could actually pull them back and not allow them to use the PDA brand. But other than that, this is an operation which Mike oversees and I do not, PDA-CA. However, we have sent out a notice through our 501c4 Progressives for Democracy in America. And a federal PAC is not supposed to chime in on endorsements of state and local candidates. But state PACs can, and the 501c4s can. But the 501c4s are only supposed to campaign inside their membership. A PAC, either federal or state, can go to town and start raising money and putting up billboards with their endorsed candidates' faces, and et cetera, buy ads and drop hundreds of millions of dollars into local city council races, for instance. So that's probably the near future for PDA-CA. Thank you for doing this, Mike, and the whole PDA-CA team. This is really great. And take it away.
Yeah, it's a genuine pleasure to do this. It's going to be fun. PDA-CA recently reorganized and we're much more efficient, and we hope to have a really good 2025. Next up is I'm going to ask Hanye to introduce our guest of honor, Betty Yee. Hanye?
Yes, Mike, she will be here. And thank you so much. Thank you, PDA-CA. Thank you, PDA, Alan Minsky, Mike Thaler, who I've been going back and forth with for such a long time, Dorothy Reich, who I see her on the first screen, looking wonderful as usual. I just want to thank everybody for being here. I think Betty is going to be here from what we communicated with her at 7:10, but before I do introduce her, I have had the honor and the privilege of working with her campaign for the past 3 months. And if any of you have any questions that we're not going to be able to answer on this call, I'm more than happy to leave my information, and I will leave my information here for you all to contact me directly. We very much look forward to what the next 2 years will look like for her campaign. Mike, did you have any other announcements? Because I don't think she's here yet.
Let me jump in real quick, Kanye. If you have it handy, you may want to drop any information about making donations to your campaign in the chat.
Absolutely, yes.
While we're waiting, on the agenda is officer reports that we were thinking about skipping, but we could at least do 1 or 2 of those until she arrives. So I would like to introduce our vice chair, actually president, vice president, I'm the president, and Wade Alexander. Wade, do you have any comments you'd like to say? And stretch them out until Betty's here.
Well, I'm so grateful to be working alongside Mike Thaler, along David Wright, along Alan Minsky, Hanye, and so many amazing organizers. I think that 2025 demands a lot of the progressive movement. I think we're going to have to organize, and I feel that PDA-CA is here to meet that challenge in California. So I just look forward to the the work ahead. And I think it's going to be a busy year. So that's my report.
Okay, that wasn't long enough. So let's see what, yeah, what one thing we did last year, although we're still in the year, so I guess it's this year, is we got involved in Prop 33, and which was the rent control issue. And we put a lot into it, and unfortunately, it didn't pass, but we put hours and hours into it, and and felt good about supporting something that we agreed with and something that was progressive. The other thing we worked on was what? Oh, rooftop solar. With bills to encourage and help people do rooftops solar in California, came up. It was a real fight because they would come up, they wouldn't go to committee, and then a new one would come up and it wouldn't go to committee, or a new one would come up in the Senate and then it wouldn't go to the Assembly. And finally, it got pushed through with your help, because we were calling Assembly people and state senators. And we were really thrilled that it made it through both the Assembly and the Senate. Unfortunately, our governor vetoed it. So I guess we'll be starting over again. So, any word from Betty?
Betty,
I see her. Okay. So in that case, Betty, this is your opportunity to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about yourself and what you have in mind to accomplish when you're governor. Take us up to 15 minutes or more if you need it, and then we'll go into a Q&A session.
Okay, great.
There.
Thanks very much, Mike. Really appreciate the update that you just gave on the solar legislation. So very involved with that. Thank you for the opportunity. Good evening, Progressive Democrats, and just really grateful for the opportunity to just share a little bit about myself as we prepare for the next big election in California, which will be in 2026 for the gubernatorial campaigns, as well as the other statewide races. But I'm just want to talk a little bit, maybe to start, just reflecting on, just where we are at this point in time, certainly after the November 5th election, and then I'll go a little bit more into my background. As a Democrat, and certainly as the vice chair of the California Democratic Party, I've always had a commitment to engage voters in the most direct way as possible, and spent pretty much the last year and a half doing so, canvassing in our targeted congressional districts. And I think what really was problematic from my vantage point fairly early on in terms of the messaging and how we were engaging voters was not really understanding the lived realities of many Californians. We're perceived as a progressive state, but when you look and peel that back, there are so many Californians who are struggling. And with an economy that doesn't work for everyone, and frankly, with a political system that isn't capturing all of the voices of what people are experiencing in their lives. Happy to report that we did win some congressional seats, but certainly did not, at the end of the day, were able to flip the House into Democratic hands. But having said that, the reason I started out with that is that it continues to inform the work that I do as a public official with respect to how all of us in elected office should be really committed to how we are utilizing all the resources that we have to work with to deliver for the greatest public benefit. And it's some of the things that Californians are struggling with are very, very fundamental. And why I started with that is that I grew up in an immigrant household. I experienced a lot of what Californians are experiencing now in terms of growing up not with a lot of resources, growing up poor, but really having the sense that if we were ever going to be really experiencing extreme hardship, that there were supports there to help. when we were experiencing the most severe economic vulnerabilities. Those supports aren't there today for many, many Californians. And it's not because we can't have them there. It's the fact that we have not really invested in continuing to build the capacity for how we have supports for people who are going to be experiencing economic vulnerabilities throughout the course of their lives. And with what we experienced in this election cycle, I think certainly the economy and taking our foot off the pedal from just bread and butter issues, economic issues that people are facing, and not really coming to terms with the just the truths that people are living every day about affordability did cost us this election in so many ways. I'm running for governor because of my fiscal and financial background. I do believe that that will be helpful in terms of how we can invest in rebuilding these supports for Californians. Also looking at how we can continue to be a national leader. I intend to be a national leader as governor, not just in leading the resistance, which I expect every elected official to do, but also how we do the work, how we continue to do the work of rebuilding our economy, rebuilding our communities, and rebuilding lives of so many Californians who feel so untethered to the state today that they just don't feel like there is a viable future in terms of how they and their families are going to see themselves here for the long term. My background, as I said, I'm a daughter of immigrants. Grew up in a family with 6 kids, and after much sacrifice and hard work, and really learning financials from the family business, laundry and dry cleaning business, became very, very aware of just how money drives everything. And of course, in our politics, money does drive a lot. And it's why I do believe that when we talk about how we right this economy, it has to be really looking at how we are helping people versus the wealthy and corporations. When we look at our political system, I hope someday we can get money out of politics in a way of where we can level the playing field of who can participate in our electoral politics. But for the moment, it is going to be about how we deal with some of the most fundamental struggles that Californians have. Of course, issues of affordability around housing, around healthcare, and around energy and electricity costs. These are everyday struggles that Californians are having, and there are things that we can do about it. With respect to housing, I've been working this field for a long time. I do want to bring back redevelopment so that we have another source of capital where it can also open up some options of where and how we can build housing and really look more deeply into options like reuse and adaptive reuse for housing. When it comes to healthcare, continuing on the path of looking at how we achieve a single payer healthcare system, and when the medical services framework is developed by our Health and Human Services Agency in California, how we go ahead and proceed to engaging with the federal government on the waivers that we'll need to look at a unified financing system. And then with respect to electricity and energy costs, really holding our utilities accountable. We need to accelerate renewable energy development. We need to look at how we are going to have frankly, a lot more accountability over the oversight responsibilities of the PUC. It's just not all right when you have PG&E that's coming in for rate increases and we see no improvements in their capital assets. And yet at the next turn, they're coming in to say, oh, by the way, this fire may have been started by some of our equipment and assets. And so things like that just suggest to me that, when you have regulatory agencies and enforcement agencies that are being reactive rather than proactive, there's a whole lot more work that we can do there. I'm running for governor because I have lived all of this in terms of what Californians are struggling with. I'm running a grassroots campaign. I have always felt that as a Democrat, even in my early days of activism, that we do have to meet people where they are. And it's why I always choose to canvass at every election cycle to really continue to be informed about the issues and concerns that are top of mind for our Californians. As governor, as I said, leadership will be required, but the leadership will come from doing. This is not a time just to sit back and be of platitudes, but it's a time to really engage our communities so that we can talk about when we talk about really looking at addressing the housing affordability crisis. How do we do that so that we're talking about how we build economically and environmentally sustainable communities? And this is going to be really about how we can have our government be more people-driven, stakeholder-driven on the ground, rather than decisions being made for us by interests that have the loudest voices and have the biggest pocketbooks. And so this is going to be how we will lead in California with resistance, not just resisting, but also about how we're rebuilding. And so as I said, running a grassroots campaign, we have been and our candidacy began in the latter part of March. We raised our first $1 million by the end of June, all from individual contributions, and we hope to at least match that, if not more, by the end of the year, and have a plan to be viable and raise enough by the June 2026 primary. But I'm here to address all of you because this is the work that PDA has done since its inception, really holding, obviously, corporate interests at bay, but also holding our government accountable. And what I have seen, frankly, over almost 2 decades is that we don't invite strict accountability over the deployment of our financial resources, nor do we revisit, just the use of our dollars when they are not working in terms of delivering the outcomes that Californians need. So this is something as a governor that I want to instill back in our legislative process, certainly create an expectation that this is a priority and that we are going to be sure that we are centering those communities that are the most heavily burdened so that we can see our job being done in terms of how we deliver the greatest public benefit for all Californians, but especially those for whom the heaviest burdens have fallen. So I would be very proud to hold the PDA endorsement. This is the campaign we will continue to run. It is on the ground. It is informed. It is going to be about recruiting people who are going to be helping to draft the policy initiatives. And it's also going to be about how we will continue to have our communities engaged, because out of what has just happened in this election, I know we're all kind of in a state of despair in some fashion, but what can come out of this and what California can do in leading as we're rebuilding is actually continuing to organize our communities, continuing to organize everyday Californians so they know that they have a place in this state, so they know that their voice matters, and that they will be the ones that will actually be the architects of how we can just essentially take back our government and know that when we talk about accountability, it is very much about how we are delivering for everyday Californians. So I think with that, Mike, I'm going to stop there. But it is the work that I've been doing for the better part of almost 4 decades. My career began in public health during the HIV/AIDS crisis, and very much was about how we deliver information to many underserved communities at that time when we didn't know much about the crisis, and then all the way to developing state-funded programs to deal with the disease, all the way from education and outreach to treatment and prevention. So this is work that I am comfortable doing, and it's not going to be easy, but I think it's made easier if we can do it in an outwardly fashion and engage Californians along the way. So with that, I will stop, and I'm happy to entertain questions.
Okay, and in fact, next up on our agenda are questions. These will be pretty specific questions, and we're seeing some of them showing up in the chat now, and I'm sure people will put in a lot more. So the chat will be moderated by David Wright, one of our officers. So David.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you and welcome, Betty Yee. I'm really, really excited to hear your answers to some of these questions. And I'm going to start with a biggie. How do you plan to progressively tackle climate change in California, especially with regard to reducing carbon emissions, increasing renewable energy, and preparing for the effects of extreme weather events like they're having in the northeast right now?
Sure. No, thank you. Climate change has to be a part of every policy discussion in California. It affects every aspect of what we do with respect to how we serve Californians, from housing to transportation to looking at how we're going to be looking at future food supplies. It affects every aspect of our lives. The way that I would like to tackle it, frankly, is looking at how we really focus and center on those disproportionately affected communities. When we have had climate bonds in the past, when we've had funding for programs to begin to help deal with some of these issues, they don't tend to reach the communities that are most in need. And in fact, I would say that most of our climate policies in the past have been about shifting the burden to some of our most underserved communities. And so I would really like to center our work on that. I would like to look at financing tools such as the climate bond and how we look at the debt service for things like that as a way of maybe being a driver of how we can reduce emissions. And one of the ways that I'm exploring, and this is something that I'm exploring on a more global basis, and that is, can we have the debt service for instruments like climate bonds be really tied to reaching carbon or excuse me, emissions reductions, so that if we aren't meeting targets, our debt service goes up. And the reason that being that then everyone has a stake in the game. Right now, I don't believe that people understand the severity of how we're dealing with the climate crisis. They don't understand the interrelationship of all the impacts of the climate crisis on other aspects of what the government is responsible for doing. And so I do think there are some financing initiatives that can be explored that can be helpful there. But I would say, first and foremost, we have to just center and prioritize our frontline communities that have been the most heavily burdened.
Super, thank you. And as kind of a follow-up in a different direction, will you appoint new California Public Utilities Commissioners with those that have no conflict of interest with the fossil fuel industry and electric industries?
Absolutely, absolutely. This is part of the problem we've been having. The PUC has become too much of a rubber stamp. When we talk about all of the functions of the PUC, when we talk about the Office of the Ratepayer Advocate, when we talk about their auditing functions, everything has been reactive. And an enforcement agency and a regulatory agency should be proactive, should be looking at facts and information that are being put forth by experts, but certainly not be representing industries that are in conflict and under the jurisdiction of the commission.
Fantastic. And then to go even a little bit further, will you support encouraging the installation of rooftop solar by giving tax breaks to those who install it, changing the net energy metering so that reasonable payment for each and every kilowatt hour solar users feed into the grid?
Absolutely, absolutely. No, this is and I want to back up and just kind of talk about a vision that I've had, and I'm trying to figure out how to make it work without everything falling apart. And that is, in some ways, when we talk about, renewable energy like solar, particularly solar, it's almost like we have to put a scenario together of how we're going to essentially break up the IOU utilities as we know them today. The business model of how the IOUs work today, investor-owned utilities work today, can't be the model of the future. And we're going to continue to see rates go up if this is how we're going to continue to do business in terms of how we provide electricity and energy in California. And I say that because it's hard to, when we do this piecemeal, when we're looking at renewables, maybe there's an incentive for this or an incentive for that, but when we're not looking at this wholesale from the perspective of how the business of utilities has to change and how energy will be developed in different ways going forward, and the less reliance on fossil fuels, I think we've got to start demonstrating, kind of the business case for how this can be done. And so, and I think we've done so much with rooftop solar. We know the incentives work. We also know that as we continue to do this, that of course utilities will cry foul, that this is just upsetting, their whole, kind of structure. And but I'd like to really kind of take it a step further and demonstrate why we need to start moving in this direction in a more accelerated fashion.
Great, great, thank you. And I'm going to kind of segue into another form of energy,
Sure.
and this is one that came out of our attendees in 2016 in June. In your capacity as California State Land Commissioner, you decided to waive California Environmental Quality Act. CEQA required environmental impact report, requiring extending Pacific Gas and Electric's Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant leases on the people of California's coastal tidelands beyond 2016 and 2019. what is your current position on the continued operation of the Diablo Canyon power plant? And will you be calling for the closure of Diablo? And what public actions have you undertaken to advocate for the closure of the nuclear power plant?
Yeah, no, and I think there was probably some inaccuracies in the question, but I understand the issue and I know the issue. I was then and continue to be an advocate of shutting down Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. When Governor Newsom decided to bring it back online, well, let me go back. The question really had to do with why did I not support the EIR at the time that would have shown, some particular risks and other, particularly seismic and other potential hazards. Why did I not support that and instead, just look to essentially sign on to an agreement that PG&E agreed to in terms of shutting down the plant? And the reason I did that was because I thought the EIR would actually take us into a process where we would not have a date certain to shutting down that plant. And so I wanted a date certain. I did not want it to continue to just kind of go through this process of where we were not going to actually see an end date. We had the federal permit a timeline. We also had that we wanted to sync up, and we did do that with the decision that we made. And so for me, it was about having a hard date where we could shut that plant down. And PG&E started to shut it down. And when the governor and then the state got nervous about the blackouts that we were having over, I believe, Labor Day weekend over a year ago, he saw fit to go to the legislature to say, we need to bring this back up. To which PG&E had us over a barrel because they essentially said to the state, if you want to bring it back up, the state's going to have to pay for it, i.e. the state and ratepayers will have to pay for it. And so this is where we've come. It was actually on the brink of getting shut down, and Governor Newsom got the legislature to bring it back. And what happened during that time when it was brought back online is that every renewable energy project, every solar project, every project that was getting developed on the renewable side just essentially had to be put to bed because the return on investment now with the Diablo Canyon coming back online wasn't penciling out. And so this really created a problem with respect to the agreement that we had, that Governor Newsom and I actually voted on together on the State Lands Commission, which said that we were going to shut down Diablo Canyon by a date certain. And in exchange for that power, we would help facilitate PG&E in terms of its renewable portfolio so they could get more renewables online. And so all that's now been negated. I am not a bit, when I become governor, I want to shut down Diablo Canyon. I want to look at how we can get back on track in terms of accelerating the development of renewables and just once and for all not have that particular source of energy because we do know that there are other more cost-effective sources that we can draw from.
Okay, great. Staying with climate change and environmental issues, I'm going to segue over to the big F word, fracking. Would you ban the sale of aquifers to private equity firms and the extraction of our water supplies by corporations? And would you ban fracking in the state of California?
I would. I will be the first to say I don't know the details of what that process would look like, but I am not a fan of fracking. Creates all kinds of hazards. It's energy, high intensive energy consumption, seismic hazards, all of that. It should not even be a practice that we have here in California. And as I said, I'm not well versed in terms of what that process of actually moving away from it would look like, but certainly am supportive of that. The other thing with respect to just private equity, and I want to talk about this a little bit. The idea that private interests can come in and actually, oversee these operations that have no regard for safety, for environmental hazards, any of these other risks that we entail, should be really a point of attention. We're going to see a lot of private equity activity in all realms of what government does now, just because it is a moneymaker for them. They come in, they look at situations of where states and maybe local governments are, just in despair or in distress about where they're going to get, just energy. They will come in purportedly to promise that there will be additional energy capacity developed, but at the same time, we're going to have to live with the risks of what that entails. I don't believe that the costs of these risks really are warrant those kinds of activities to continue.
Great, thank you very much. And with water management in mind, what is your approach to California's water management, especially considering ongoing droughts and population growth? How will you balance environmental protection with the needs of industries such as agriculture and energy production? And the fact that we may be losing more and more of our Colorado River water.
Okay, right. No, thank you. This is the next crisis to hit us, if not already. We've long known that we're a drought state, and yet we have not prepared for this. I live in Northern California. I care a lot about our Delta. I am not a supporter of the Delta tunnels that have been proposed. And when you look at just water, a couple of challenges with respect to water. One is the governance of water, much more regional, and certainly different regions have different needs. But I also think this is a time where we should be taking the opportunity to look at how we're doing agriculture differently, how we're looking at really maximizing all of our demand side activities. And I hope that there are some good models in terms of local water districts, and I would look there because there are some excellent models in terms of what water districts are doing with their customers around conservation, looking at how to facilitate, just really hardening, their homes and properties with respect to water consumption and water technology. I think that should be something that should be available and accessible to all Californians. And so I think there are things that we can do that can be helpful. There are also practices that need to be changed. And I will say agriculture, the biggest one. I actually thought President Biden was on the right track to look at putting some incentives in place where farmers were compelled to think differently about how they farm, and that would get to some of these water issues. My relationship with water most recently had to do with a couple of desal plants that were before the State Lands Commission. Permits to build desalination plants, the biggest one being the Poseidon plant in Huntington Beach. Our jurisdiction over that permit was pretty narrow, but we did condition that permit to where whatever was built was going to have to be, the operation of which was going to have to be GHG neutral. And the company would not invest in the technology for that to happen. They eventually dropped the proposal. That plant is not going to be built. But for every plant like that, we have to just look at just what the risks and the costs are going to be. And there is a cost benefit. There are some new technologies around desalination that are showing some promise, where the reverse osmosis happens deeper in the ocean so that the ocean health may be protected. Remains to be seen if that is going to result in greater benefits to ocean health long term. But also say that we have to be very, very cognizant that as we're dealing with our water issues, it has every ability to exacerbate all other parts of what we are trying to continue to hold and to be healthy for Californians, including our oceans, including our air, and certainly other water supplies.
Okay. And my last in my climate change and environmental issues chunk here is deals with actually foreign relations also, because what will you do or will you do whatever is necessary to get a super fund or whatever its equivalent is to clean up the sewage and pollution that crosses the border from Mexico from Tijuana?
Oh my gosh. Actually, we have tried to do that. This was a big issue when I was on the State Lands Commission. It is one where I think the state of California, we actually made some headway with respect to working with all the local jurisdictions in that region, including the Port of San Diego, and got some funding when U.S. Senator Feinstein was still alive. She did allocate some funding to California so that we could actually develop our plan on this side of the border. And really, what was not happening was the accountability with respect to what the Mexican government was doing. I think it is imperative that we be in engagement and ongoing engagement with the Mexican government about what we do with the cross-border pollution. I actually left that issue for one of my fellow commissioners when I left the commission in hopes that with her background as a former ambassador, that she would take it forward. Not much has happened. That this has got to be a priority. It's unacceptable that it is causing all kinds of public health hazards in many of our jurisdictions in the southern border.
Great, thank you. We're going to segue over to health and welfare, and this has been one that's been very near and dear to PDA-CA's heart, and that's it's gone under various names: CalCare, Medicare for All, Healthcare for All. And what is your position on getting every person in the state of California covered by healthcare so they have healthcare security?
Oh my goodness. It's imperative. I mean, when we don't, we pay a lot more for healthcare. And I do think, and I've had conversations with many of the stakeholders around this issue. When I sat on the CalPERS board, the California Public Employees Retirement System board, we negotiated healthcare rates with our health plans that cover our public employees. And no surprise, every year the rates go up. And but also not a lot in terms of not a lot of progress in terms of continuing to build capacity to meet the needs of our members, and particularly in the mental health and behavioral health arena. CalCare, however you want to call it, I think it is something that we need. Like I said, otherwise I think we're all paying more for healthcare. But what I hope we can demonstrate, because as we surveyed our members at CalPERS, I think the biggest issue we're going to have in terms of transitioning to a new healthcare system is whether people are going to understand what this change looks like. I had actually thought that when we had the Affordable Care Act and implementation here in California, to the extent that many Californians sign up for ACA coverage under our Medi-Cal program, that perhaps we could have piloted what kind of a single payer system looked like, or a CalCare system could look like, or a government funded system could look like, so that people could see just what exactly this meant. Healthcare is very personal and private to people, and I can say with the surveys that we did of our members at CalPERS, they're afraid of change. They're afraid of losing what they've got. Even when you suggest that what they're going to get is going to be much more comprehensive coverage and potentially at lower costs. So I think we have some hurdles to overcome with respect to what this looks like. And I also don't know, depending on what the health services framework will be that our Health and Human Services Agency is developing now, what is going to be expected with respect to any out-of-pocket costs for any of our insureds, just what the any potential exposure in terms of taxpayers will be. I don't know the answer to that. I know ideally there should not be, because we're taking the insurance company a piece of it out of the equation. And we are looking at also at administrative efficiencies as a result. But I don't know without looking at the details. And I'm just being honest. And I will look at that with a fine-tooth comb because I'm curious. Because obviously if we can move into a system like this, we should have done that yesterday.
All right, super. Continuing on, I have a question here about state banking. Because North Dakota has a wonderful state bank. It supports its farmers. It supports its small businesses. And what's killing a lot of small businesses are banking fees. And if we had a state bank, we could be one, stabilizing a lot of small businesses, including minority-owned businesses that have hard time getting access to banking. What are your thoughts?
There were several bills proposing a state bank that went through the legislature. And what was problematic with the bills were a couple things. One, how the bank would be capitalized. the proposals that were before the legislature suggested that monies could come from one of the funds in the treasurer's office that we actually use to float, for cash flow purposes. So that was not going to work. But also how the bank would be governed. I actually oppose the state banking bill, and I'll tell you why. I opposed it because the reason for having a state bank are all things that we can address today. And I know that, and I'm not in the pockets of big banks, believe me, that's not what I want. On the other hand, there are banks that are in existence now that I hope that we can stand up because they actually do serve minority communities. And these are our community development financial institutions, our CDFIs, and minority depository institutions, MDIs. And they are in underserved areas today. The Biden-Harris administration infused a ton of money into these banks, and California has not moved all that much to get any of that money. And yes, traditional banks pay into the CDFI fund at the federal level, but I have always thought that if we could actually have these banks that are in the minority areas and in the underserved areas actually provide the financial services to these communities, that we could actually create a whole economic development program around this. Now, how do we look at getting, whether it's philanthropy or just even from the CDFI fund, but these banks actually need to increase their capacity to be able to serve their communities. They are not technologically capable at this point. They don't have the tools, and I learned this during the PPP loans during the COVID crisis, where traditional banks were able to lend to businesses at a pretty good clip. But when a CDFI was engaged, they were doing just a small percentage of loans, and with what was made available to them. But these are the institutions that are in the communities right now. They know the businesses, they know the communities, they know the people who live there, and they should be servicing those communities. And I think the goals of the bank are laudable, and I support the goals. But we have an existing framework now that actually can service these communities. And also we can build a whole workforce initiative around this to where the financial leaders that are going to be running these institutions should be coming from the communities that are being served. So for all these reasons, I did not support a state bank. I don't know how, frankly, the federal government would look at it in terms of chartering it and all of the other attendant requirements. But I'll just say there are already existing mechanisms that I would like to just stand up even further. And by the way, the climate funding that came from the Biden-Harris administration, there was mention of CDFIs as a conduit of how we were going to get some of these dollars to underserved communities.
All right, great. Let's go over to transportation and infrastructure. I love these things because we were promised infrastructure from the previous president, and the current president actually delivered. So how are we going to improve on that by mandating an electric high-speed rail network built from San Diego through San Francisco and Sacramento that uses clean, renewable energy?
I'm sorry, you cut out for a little bit there. Could you repeat that? Just say that over again.
Okay, I'm sorry. Will you mandate that a high electric speed rail network be built from San Diego to San Francisco and Sacramento, which uses clean, renewable energy?
Absolutely. I mean, it's kind of like, what's the point if it doesn't, right? But also, I'm hopeful that the impacts of such a system would be such that it would not create just adverse environmental impacts along the course of the rail line, which oftentimes is the case when you build large systems like that. You have communities that actually have to live with the consequences of not doing it right. And I do think this is something we have to insist upon. And also, I hope can be a model for how we look at, future transportation systems as well.
Right, thank you. And then how do we achieve optimal travel times so workers can interact with family and friends, service groups, and get adequate sleep? There's a lot of engineering going on in San Diego, LA, Orange County,
Yeah.
San Francisco, taking trying to force more and more people into commuting by rail and or bus, and
Uh-huh.
it just really seems like with all the stoplights and so forth, buses have a heck of a time getting across from San Diego to East County.
Right, right. No, that's right. Um, I'm not an engineer, but I will say that I think this is something, if we are going to be building a system for the future, we're going to have to be mindful of in terms of just how mobility needs to be, very, very optimal. Um, I do want to say something about buses though, because I'm not sure that, I mean, in some localities, buses are still going to be necessary, particularly in areas that don't have much by way of public transit at all. And I think there are still many large urban areas where that's the case. And I'm looking at particularly South Los Angeles and places like that. For a system to be able to just reach high speeds and to be able to transport people. I think that has to be, if we're going to build a system like this, I hope that we have the best engineering in mind so that it's actually achieving what we want. We're not building a system just to move people and things just for the sake of moving them, but that there is an efficiency aspect to this, and we are trying to get people out of their cars. And this is, I think, going to be critical in terms of how people make choices about what mode of transportation to use. There has to be a benefit, and I'm like I said, I'm not an engineer, so I can't even comment about just the science that's already been developed to make this a possibility.
All right,
Mike,
great.
may I interrupt? With a simple question that is not political, and that is, Betty, how much longer would you like to go before we wrap up?
Oh, let me, actually, I'm happy to go for a little while longer. You're all asking good questions, so.
Yes, I am very impressed myself. Your action, yeah, in our agenda, we have you going until 8:15 and then making a little closing statement. So that's another, a little over 20 minutes.
Okay, that's fine.
All right, great. David?
Thank you. So I have a couple of questions that kind of have good overlapping. One is regarding homelessness and truly affordable housing. And we've had problems in several different municipalities where city governments have been given money to spend, and they don't fix homelessness. They just kick it down the road by housing them and not getting them back and reintegrating the homeless, the people without their homes into a productive lifestyle, such as like Salt Lake City has done with its pilot program. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think where I see the most promise in terms of how we can help those who are unsheltered and who are without homes now is really having a robust, facilitating a robust relationship between the county and the cities. The counties are going to be the service providers with respect to a lot of the social supports and the behavioral health supports. And then also our some of our community-based organizations. I will say not all of them. Some of them, frankly, do better than others. I'm going to just shine a light on a particular organization that I thought really did some great work, and that's the Bakersfield Homeless Center. And it's a center that looks at, for a long time, it was the only crisis shelter between Los Angeles and Fresno. It began as a shelter for single adult males, but it's now become a shelter for families, and particularly families with adults with children. And what happens when there are people who walk through the doors of that center is that they are immediately assessed in terms of what their needs are, from the adults to the children. There is a program that gets developed for them. There is intensive and extensive case management that is provided to them, not only while they're at the shelter, but for quite a bit of time after they leave the shelter. And why I'm bringing this up is because how we're going to deal with our homeless population is going to require this intensive kind of work. There's no way around it. We're either going to support them or we're not going to support them. For me, it's the biggest humanitarian crisis that will continue to grow if we don't get our arms around what we need to do. And I've heard every excuse in the book, from the misunderstanding of who's living unsheltered to looking at the assumptions that people make about why people don't do well when they are housed after being unhoused for a long time. I mean, we've all heard those excuses, and some are legitimate, but frankly, there are a couple things that I think are missing. One is the complexion of who is unsheltered today has become much more complicated. We see students who are unhoused. We see families. We see people who, but for just missing, a month's rent because they got sick, off of, for a day of work. I mean, these are things that we can actually solve. And I really would like to see the state being in the business of how we can provide those supports to people like that, who, but for, just one unfortunate incident, were unable to, just stay on their feet. We can solve that rather than having them enter this spiral of, just becoming homeless and not being served in the most appropriate way. So first, just understanding who it is that we're serving. Secondly, really looking at how we are going to build up our mental health, behavioral health, case management capacity. We have a shortage of these providers right now, and there has to be an ability for us to work with our universities, our education system to be sure that we are training more people to do this work. We also can free up more people to do this work as we're looking at bringing more technological advancements into government so that we can free up time with some of our existing personnel who can serve those who are homeless. And then third, we have to deal with the housing supply shortage of affordable housing. And with that, I would say government is not going to fix the housing problem itself. It has to be a public-private enterprise. There's not enough money in the system, and there's never going to be enough money, certainly for a high-cost state like California, to be able to meet the demand. And so as we look at that, this is why I want to bring back, some sort of redevelopment so that we can look at more options for how we can, build and expand our housing supply. I want to look at where we can have some public-private partnerships that can be incentivized. I've had several medium-sized employers who have come to me during this campaign to say, we're providing our own housing assistance program because we want to continue to have the best talent. But we know that this is an issue for all of California. And would you consider, maybe giving employers a tax incentive if we were able to look at helping to just add to the housing supply for working Californians? And I don't want this to be about companies being able to cherry pick talent, but I do think there are some interesting public-private partnerships that can be explored relative to how we meet the housing needs. And then third, I really do want to look at how we streamline our own state financing programs. We have tax credits, we have bond dollars, we have grants. All of this goes through separate approval processes without a lot of accountability. There's not even a dashboard for how we, look at spending this money so that we can keep track of what it is that we approve, what we're building. These developers have to, stop at every turn with every financing source that they get to get approvals, and that is actually adding time to the process of actually breaking ground on projects. And so we can do our part as a state to just streamline and facilitate our own allocation process with respect to these financing sources. And then lastly, I think with respect to local governments, there has to be an ability to not have local governments be the point of where projects get vetoed, but where they actually are looking at how we are looking at housing as central to how we build, as I said, economically and environmentally sustainable communities. That if we are looking at building housing, the state needs to take more ownership with respect to how we are going to be the ones providing, hopefully, financing to be more of an equal partner on dealing with infrastructure needs. How we can be the entity that provides incentives for business development so that we are looking at what we're attracting relative to hopefully, just new clean technology companies and hopefully just industries that we want to have in our communities so that when young people look for economic mobility, they're not having to think about leaving the state. Where we can look at how we build a micro economy around the whole arena about care, where people like my 101-year-old mother are going to live when they all want to age in place and stay in their homes. You know, what does that look like in terms of being able to provide for that? So these are the conversations we need to have. So it's not just about housing, but housing is central. But you get the housing built, and what is it that we want to have the housing support? And so I hope it is a way that we can be more innovative and creative about addressing this. It is a financing issue at the end of the day, but it's also an authority issue with respect to what we want our local governments to be able to do responsibly. And I think we can do a lot in terms of how we can just provide more financial flexibility for how to look at meeting their housing needs that are more comprehensive. And by the way, this all plays into this what I consider one of the most not difficult, wasn't difficult, but one of the most egregious, I would say, debates that we've had this year over public safety. I was a no position on Prop 36 because I'm not about reincarcerating people, particularly those who were considered low-level offenders and having them resentenced. And when you talk about having mandated felony treatment mandated felonies, there's no treatment capacity. And so we're just kind of perpetuating this expectation that this is going to be an issue that will get solved when we haven't built the capacity for that. And by the way, we know what happens and what communities are the most affected by policies like this. And so I was a no on Prop 36, but when we can talk about building economically and environmentally sustainable communities, we also are talking about building healthy and safe communities.
Super. I'm going to jump down a little bit lower on my list of questions because we're running out of time and I want to hit some important ones. Do you support a two-state solution in Palestine, and will you act to divest the state from any investments in countries and companies owned by or supporting any combatant in the Middle East, Palestine area?
I do support a two-state solution, although I have to admit, every day that goes by, I'm having a harder time really envisioning what that would look like. I was someone who early on was pretty early on calling for a ceasefire after the October 7th war broke out. And with respect to divestment, certainly anything that furthers the war, and I want to be very clear that because there's a lot that's always drawn conclusion, but I'm very critical of the Israeli government, and to the extent that there are investments that really benefit the Israeli government, I definitely would be looking at those very carefully to be sure that we are not aiding and abetting that activity. I'm not sure that all Israel investments are necessarily related to the government and to the war, so I would have to look and see what those are. This is personal to me. I have 2 members of my campaign staff who are Palestinian, who have lost dozens of family members. It is also personal to me from just being a humanitarian. This is not what we should be looking to support. Very disappointed in our own federal government right now with not having taken a stronger stance to this point. And it is unfortunately going to be something that is going to it's going to be protracted, I think, in terms of just the conflicts that we're going to continue to see. But I do support a two-state solution. I support just whatever we can to just put this war to an end. I was hopeful that we would do that after the leader of Hamas was killed, but the war continues. And so, but there's a lot that is happening that I think has been destructive. I think we could be critical of the Israeli government without being considered being an anti-Semite. I think we can be critical of our own government and talk about what's in the best interest of the United States as it relates to our relationship with the rest of the world and our allies. And but I just see this has been a very, very dark moment in our history, and I hope that we can really envision and see and realize a two-state solution. someday.
All right, great. I think this will be the last question for you. And I think it's a kind of a fun one in my mind because it was one that we didn't think of in the leadership in PDA-CA, but it came up on the read and it said, what is your position on ranked choice voting, and will you see about getting it going here in California, at least at the state level?
Yeah, yeah. Um, I actually like ranked choice voting. I actually think it's, although I will say that, well, first of all, let me just say this. When it started in San Francisco, I found it kind of interesting because I think it totally flummoxed everybody in the political sphere, particularly the consultants, because they didn't really know how to get their candidate well positioned. But I actually think it's a good tool from the perspective that it actually compels candidates to think about, broadening their outreach and hopefully, broadening their attempts to gain support. And then the idea that this doesn't have to go into a runoff election to save costs is always, kind of in order as a consideration. I do think there are different considerations with respect to how we look at candidates in a ranked choice voting system. But I think overall it's a good idea. I think at the state level, boy, I just takes us so long to just kind of process our votes now. I can't even imagine what a ranked choice voting system would look like. I will say that I support the concept for at the state level, but I think practically speaking, I want to look into it a little bit more.
Thank you. I'm going to toss this over to Mike, and thank you, Betty. You have been a delight and a joy to listen to, and I have learned a lot. So I was writing notes, if you didn't notice, of things I have to look up from what you said. So thank you very much. Mike?
Thank you very much, David.
Yeah, I agree. I hope we haven't overburdened your time, but this was fascinating. But I do have one more question, and
Sure.
it's not political, and that is that on our agenda we have you giving a closing statement. Would you like to do that, and/or would you like to bring up some topic that you know would be of interest to progressives that you haven't been asked yet?
Sure, be happy to. I think I'd like to bring up a topic, and it's something that I want to stress as it relates to my own campaign, and what I just experienced over this election cycle. We do a lot as Democrats, and I think we do our part, certainly as grassroots Democrats, to meet people where they are. I'm not so sure that we necessarily listen very well, and myself included. I think it's very easy to be present, to hear, but in terms of listening and internalizing and then really understanding what it is that we can do to, just really improve people's lives. I hope that that becomes kind of the next point of focus for us as a Democratic Party. The Democratic National Committee will be electing a new chair in February, and I think what I hope, and the chair candidates are still making themselves known. I think there are 3 or 4 declared now. There will be candidate forums featuring them in January, throughout the month of January, and I'm sure you'll be getting information about when those will be. But my hope is that I do want to focus on one thing that I thought our party got right here in California, and that is we did invest in a year-round organizing program of where we are engaging voters year-round, not just months ahead of an election, but really understanding what people cared about at any point in time. And when we went out and asked those questions and surveyed people, it actually helped some of the candidates who were running in those districts because they didn't have the capacity or had not even undertaken something like that. And I think that's really important to do. So what I'm going to be looking at in terms of a new chair for the Democratic National Committee is someone who's willing to invest state by state in that kind of work. I want to double down on what worked well here in California. Because a lot of pundits, we're all still criticizing, what went wrong and just making these observations. But I just wanted to land by saying what actually went right. And it's the work that all of you did on the ground. It's the work that I know many of us did. And I actually feel really good that here in California, we left everything on the field this election cycle. But at the end of the day, we needed to listen more to what people were really unhappy about, and it was always the pocketbook issues. And it's always going to be the pocketbook issues. And so this is where I hope that as Democrats, we will continue to just lean in on these issues, particularly for those communities that are struggling the most, that as we make progress, that we are demonstrating to them just how their lives are going to be improved by it, and going back and seeing whether in fact their lives were improved. That's what accountability is. And strict accountability, we should not be afraid of it. And I'll end with this. Every time that I have asked for strict accountability over the expenditure of our resources, financial resources in California, especially during the COVID crisis, where dollars were flying out the door out of my office, the state controller's office, at a pretty good clip. Whenever I would raise issues of accountability, the response was always, who's she going to throw under the bus? I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. I just want to be sure that we're delivering well for all of California, and that we really are going to do our best to make sure that people were safe, and that the people who needed the dollars the most were getting them. And so I'm just going to end with this, that I'm going to talk about accountability a lot during this campaign. I'm not afraid of strict accountability. It's why you elect me as a elected official. And I want to instill that on the legislature, to go back and having budget hearings that matter, where we are actually bringing people in to talk about what they're experiencing in their lives every day, so that the solutions that we develop can actually have the largest impact, and that we hopefully can reach a point of where we can think about the economy that we have here in California, the most diverse economy, one of the richest economies in the world. But when we peel that back, that one day we can see that everyone has a stake in it, and actually can see themselves thriving in it for themselves and for their families. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak about that, because it's something I feel very, very passionate about. And we don't do these jobs to just take a position and to say that our job's done because we put $20 billion out the door for homelessness. What the heck do we get for it? And our people's lives improved.
Hey, thank you very much. I can't thank you enough, in fact. And I have so much respect for you that I actually wore a collared shirt for the first time since the pandemic. Next time, I'll be wearing a tie. And I want everyone to know that this has been recorded, and we will put it on the PDA-CA YouTube page, and you're all welcome to review it. And I'm almost speechless as to how impressed I am with Betty, and I'm as impressed with the amount and quality of the questions from you, the participants in this meeting. We didn't get to half of them, so, but we need to get some sleep. So be looking for the next PDA-CA meeting. It probably will be next year, but early next year. And we, as I said, we're reorganizing, and we're going to be putting a lot more effort in the upcoming years, and especially in the gubernatorial race. So on that, meeting adjourned. Thank you again, Betty.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you, David. Thanks, everyone.